Kena Bridge of Spirits being a debut game makes about as much sense as watching the movie Tenet backwards, although actually that might make more sense than if you watched it normally. That was a confusing movie, huh? People were like fighting a war backwards or something. I don't know, man. I couldn't hear a line of dialogue half the time, you goddamn speedboat. But seriously, the level of polish and beauty in this game, while also having the scale that it does, running about 10 hours long, having a fully explorable 3D environment with a fleshed out story, cutscenes, massive boss fights, puzzles, and a side helping of collectathon going on amongst it all, it's hard to think of a more impressive debut title in recent years. But even removed from that, this game stacks up quite well against the titles from established studios. And I'd argue that despite the fact that it doesn't bring too much innovation to the table, its handle on what makes action-adventure games great while also giving us amazing enemy variety and a beautiful world and story is enough to make me say that this game is easily a must-play title. In fact, as weird as it sounds, it's actually that lack of innovation that makes me feel like that. And considering I very recently used unoriginality as a knock against Ghost of Tsushima, not one that ruined the experience, but something that held the game back in my eyes, I feel like I need to explain why it's different here and how Kena managed to make formulaic seem fun. A Canadian filmmaker by the name of Kirby Ferguson once claimed that at this point nothing is original and everything is a remix of things past. I think for you to say that about anything, any type of entertainment, then that form of entertainment needs to have been around for a while, so that it can establish the foundation on which to remix. Like, it's hard to say that the likes of Half-Life 2 or Metal Gear 1 were remixes of anything because they were made in a point in time when it was still being discovered what games were capable of. I think now though, we're hitting the point where games are old enough and have enough history for everything to be traced back as a mixture of stuff that's come before. There's of course the obvious stuff like Cadence of Hyrule. Is it a remix of Zelda and Crypt of the Necrodancer? Yeah, I mean that's its whole shtick. But even at a smaller scale or with less obvious examples, you could say that the on-beat reloading of BPM is a remix of your classic rhythm games and the active reload from Gears of War. Or the Dishonored franchise as a whole, most people will agree is kind of a mix of BioShock and Thief. Sometimes one of the sources of what's being remixed is outside of video games, like how Ghost of Tsushima is Arkham mixed with Assassin's Creed mixed with classic Kurosawa films, and you could keep going until you realize that basically every small new mechanic that pops up nowadays still has a traceable lineage. Like how classic mechanics of enemies dropping pickups on death and also being able to pull off stylish finishing moves to a low health enemy come together to define the glory kill. Dude, even Hyper Rogue, a game that is literally set in a non-Euclidean space, as in it doesn't follow the rules of what we associate in our lives with 3D movements, so left and right actually work different than how you'd think, is a remix of the game Rogue and a hyperbolic plane. Maybe nothing is truly original in the strictest sense of the word, but it's still amazing to experience a specific mix of ingredients in a way that we haven't seen before. Innovation isn't dead just because the building blocks are set in stone, but I think what comes with all of this experimentation is way too much noise and hyperbole. Every game is vying for your attention, and I think it's accepted now that everything needs to act like it's revolutionary or the next big thing, even though I think some of these games would be better served if they accepted themselves as the comfort food that they are. Through all the games that you play for their truly unique combinations, sometimes you just want a game that feels like home, an experience that feels classic and timeless. But even generic first-person shooter number 784 needs to use words like, "We're taking this franchise in a whole new direction. This is this franchise like you've never seen it before." Remember when the Modern Warfare reboot was touting that its campaign was going to be the most shocking thing in the world and it was going to really outdo the original trilogy with how twisted it was, and then it was like an aggressively average campaign? All because apparently it's not enough to just go back to how things were after you've gone off the rails, you still gotta act like this is gonna change gaming forever when it's not. But there's something really special about a game that is as comfortable with how mechanically and structurally basic it is. At no point is Kena trying to fool you into believing it's something that it's not. It is a stripped back, by the books, third-person melee adventure game with some collectathon elements. It's the absolute basic heart of a genre that we've seen for ages, a classic experience done up with breathtaking visuals and modern combat and boss design, and it doesn't try to forcibly stretch itself past that. The game is linear in the same way that stuff like Jak and Daxter is linear. You're given some leeway in the space of your current objective, and in this case it's also really easy to move around the entire map at will at practically any time, but being able to explore all of those things is exclusively for some very minor side activities and collecting things that are spread out throughout the world. There's no side quests out there. The stuff that you find can help improve your character, but mainly it's just for fun. Really, you're just going from waypoint to waypoint. And it's really interesting to see because basically any other game I can think of which has a somewhat open map and fast travel nowadays tries to turn itself into an open world RPG when it's really not necessary to do so. That kind of stuff just stretches the content out way too thin been, and instead of having a nice focused story that people can enjoy, it has a bloated, poorly paced story with bad side stuff to boot, so it's like, okay, well you made it longer, but you made everything worse. Kena doesn't have a variety of weapons, it doesn't have crazy aerial combat, it doesn't have finisher moves, it has upgrades so there is a sense of progression, but otherwise it's very cut and dry. You're going around interacting with world puzzles and hitting bad guys with a stick pushed forward by a simple story. It's a simple formula that feels like it hasn't been this simple in years. People said a few years back that single-player story-based games were dying out, and clearly they were wrong, but have you noticed how every single one of these games nowadays has at least some major open world or RPG elements? What are some of the most well-known single-player games in recent years? Red Dead 2, God of War, The Last of Us 2, Spider-Man, Doom Eternal, Ghost of Tsushima, Breath of the Wild. They all have major elements that derive from open world RPGs. That being upgrading your weapons or armor, or having side quests, or having a skill tree of some sorts. Hell, even Uncharted 4 had those weird dialogue choices that did nothing whatsoever. Do you guys remember those? That was super weird. They only showed up like 3 times in the whole game as well, so it was just like super confusing why that was a thing. And yes, Kena is also technically in that group. It has an upgrade system like I mentioned, but it's such a whisper in the background of everything else, and with the smallest tweak, the game could have given you these upgrades at different parts of the story instead of through a skill tree. Just like the majority of Uncharted 4, the majority of Kena does feel like a dying breed of games that still has plenty of strength in its legs. And anyone who's played Kena can probably agree with me that it looks like a game from like 2025 with the heart of a game from 2005. You know what? I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it, guys. Are you ready? Let's compare it to Dark Souls. Yeah, boo, I know, I went full games journalist, but I'm not talking about comparing its gameplay to the Souls series. That's played out, no one wants to hear about that. But what I will say is that one of the things that I think made Dark Souls and Demon Souls before it so great were that they were mechanically stripped down and grounded themselves in a more back-to-basics way during a time where it was becoming really fashionable to continue to escalate the crazy and unreal elements of melee games. These games came out in the midst of other titles like Bayonetta, Darksiders, Devil May Cry 4, and the God of War franchise. As those games said, I'm gonna do more and more, get even crazier, make the combat as frantic and energetic as possible, these games decided to instead try and perfect doing less. And so ironically, it was their more realistic and basic approach to combat that helped them stand out. While Kena certainly won't have remotely close to the same impact as the Souls games, I think it has the same sense of standing out by reining it in. It just creates this essential experience that accepts itself as comfort food in a way that most games don't. It stays true to its simple intentions, and it's just a real breath of fresh air. And just to cap off this point, I want to mention that I think the reason that I was so happy with Kena being formulaic, whereas I claimed that was the biggest thing that held Ghost of Tsushima back in a previous video, is because what Kena is emulating and not straying far from is a concise and dense package with a clear focus and a more casual approach to side content which doesn't feel forced. While the formula that Ghost of Tsushima borrowed from is not nearly as airtight. The Ubisoft open world design philosophy is full of holes and a lack of inspiration. Ghost executed that formula basically as well as anyone can in my opinion, but what they were actually trying to emulate just isn't as well constructed as Kena's inspirations. Playing Kena Bridge of Spirits honestly felt like I was playing a game that I'd known for years. And while I think that even to some of the people that enjoyed this game, that was actually in parts a slight knock against it because it brought nothing new to the table, that feeling of basically playing an old game is actually one of my favorite things about Bridge of Spirits. The game still plays like a modern title though, and it has great bosses and boss AI, and I think that was really important to nail. Just because we're going old school doesn't mean we have to bring in the old school jank with us. And luckily, combat in Kena, while at some points feeling a tad bit repetitive, it feels really good and responsive and stylish. I still can't get over the backflip animation, that is so cool. For those who are wondering, the only real gripe I have with this game, and it's unfortunate because it doesn't affect like 99% of it, but the 1% that it does affect is pretty important to me, but I really don't like the final boss. The quality of the bosses in this game is really high for me, and even some of the ones that leaned a bit more gimmicky were still well fleshed out and not the slog that they can be in other titles. But the last boss was just poorly designed. Obviously, I'm not showing it here, I want to stay away from spoilers, but to keep it vague, the way this boss is structured and the things that the game takes away from you during this fight come together to create a very frustrating experience. I'm pretty used to hard games at this point. I played this on the hardest difficulty that was available, and I'm gonna play it on master difficulty now that I'm done. Most of the game wasn't too bad for me, although it's tougher than you might think it would be, at least on the highest difficulty. But my issue with the boss wasn't so much about it being hard as it was being a series of really disjoint sections, and some of them are really quick at draining your health very quickly at the smallest mistake. And all the while, the game did that thing that I hate where it takes away tons of your abilities, making the game feel less fun and kinda BS. And if you die even at the very end of this marathon of a battle, you have to go back and do everything all over again. It was basically all of my video game pet peeves put in one fight, and I was not a fan. It sucks that this was the cap off of such an amazing game, but still, seriously, I don't think that anyone should be turned off from buying this game just from that one complaint. If you came here wondering if you should play the game, I gotta say, I really think it's worth a buy for just about anyone who even has a passing interest in it. I'd be very surprised if this game at any point looked interesting to you and then you played it and you didn't like it. Anyways, that was a not really review of Kena Bridge of Spirits. I'd love to hear what you guys think about it in the comments. That's me for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Peace.